Gratitude above me, gratitude below me, gratitude within me, gratitude all around me. I'm so grateful, I'm so grateful, so grateful, grateful, so grateful, I'm so grateful, I'm so grateful. You are seen, you are heard, you are loved for who you are. You are enough, you are complete, you are loved. You are seen, you are heard, you are loved for who you are. You are enough, you are complete, you are loved. Seen, I am heard, I am loved for who I am. There is nothing I need to change. I am loved. I am seen, I am heard, I am loved for who I am. There is nothing I need to change. I am loved. I am heard, I am loved for who I am. I am enough, I am complete, I am loved. I am loved. I am seen, I am loved, I am heard, I am loved.
Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome, welcome, welcome to INTA's 2021 Conference for Ministers, practitioners, teachers, and spiritual leaders. And for those of you who were with us yesterday, oh, we are so glad and we welcome you back and to join us this day. I am the Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Trish Atkins, a UFBL minister serving at Christ Universal Temple in Chicago. And I am so proud to be an INTA board member working on this conference with two others, Reverend Dale Worley, the behind the scenes guy who's a senior minister of Unity of Savannah, and Reverend Dr. Nancy Hazard, interim minister at Oakwood Heights Community Church in Staten Island. Oh, I am delighted this morning, this afternoon, or whatever, wherever you are. Sometimes I think if we're on the West Coast, it's the morning. If we're on the East Coast, it's probably in the afternoon. I'm in Chicago, right in the middle. I want to say too, put in the chat box where you're from. I want to welcome Ohio. I know Ohio's in the house, and California's in the house, and of course, Illinois is in the house. So let us know where you're from. And Colorado's in the house, so that we can do a shout out for you. I am delighted to begin today by introducing Reverend Carolyn Douglas. Reverend Douglas is the spiritual leader for Center for Spiritual Living Peninsula, located in Redwood City, California. She has been there since June 2019, after spending about 17 years at Illuminata Spiritual Center, a center for spiritual living. What I love, Carolyn is an INTA board member. Yeah, she's one of the fellow board members that we're working together to help INTA do what it does. That is, put the word of truth out so every member of our human family can receive it. But even more exciting, Carolyn is the chair of the INTA 2021 Congress. I'm going to ask Carolyn to come on and share with us some insights so you can meet her and get some info about this phenomenal Congress that's going to be happening in July. Good morning, Carolyn.
Good morning, Reverend Jackie. How are you today?
I'm awesome, and you are awesome too. Thank you for joining us this morning.
I am so happy to be here. You know, yesterday I attended every part of what was being done, and it was filling my soul. So what I would like for everyone to do is to allow yourself to feel welcome in this beloved community that we call International New Thought Alliance. You are the beloved with the beloved. Let's go within for morning prayer. Oh, recognizing that there is a divine presence, there is an infinite power that is right here where we are. It is in spirit, it is in God that we live, move, and have our very being. As such, we are one with God. So I accept and know that we are here, called for this divine appointment, to be made available to receive that word of life and truth that fills our soul and fills our heart. It plants the seed for the continuing growing of our awareness of the divine presence of God and God's activity throughout all of life. So as I speak this word, I speak it for this conference and the schedule for today, knowing that every speaker is a center of divine consciousness, and the Spirit speaks easily and effortlessly through each one. And we are blessed. This whole activity, divinely ordered, is so well prepared and blessed. The harmony of life is fully present right here with us. So we allow ourselves to just breathe and let the love of spirit to flow easily and effortlessly all the way through our body, our beings. filling the space. We're here in love to receive love, being nurtured and nourished. And for this, I am truly thankful, for I know this is established on the foundation of spiritual truth. So I invite you to just allow the gratitude and appreciation of spirit to flow easily and effortlessly within your space. With this grateful attitude as we release this word in thanksgiving for the blessing already given. And we're here now, just receiving and enjoying. So join me in closing with, and so it is, amen, ashe, and so it is. Reverend Jackie mentioned to you that I am one of the members of the International New Thought Executive Board, and my responsibility for this year is to chair our international 106th Annual World Conference. And I just want to promote that to you before we get started with our offerings for today. We have a wonderful array of activity for you. Our theme for this year is consciousness or conscious awakenings. And we have sub themes for each day. And those sub themes are consciousness and self-care, consciousness awakenings and justice or social justice, whichever one fills your heart. And the last day has to do with conscious awakenings through science and spirituality. The conference dates are July the 20th through the 22nd. We will have morning sessions, afternoon sessions, and evening sessions. Every morning, there will be sacred space for meditation, and we have wonderful meditation or spiritual practice leaders. We invite you to participate in that. And in the evening, after all of the beautiful talks and workshops are done, we will again have sacred space as prayers. And if you are interested in being a part of those closing prayers, that would be available to you. So what does it cost for the Congress? I call it an investment. The investment for the full Congress is $199 for the 3 days. If you're interested in a day rate, it's $99. If you're already one of our life members, it's $149. But you, being an attendant here today, as a conference attendee, have a special rate. If you sign on today, then the rate for you is $149. That is a nice break for this Congress. So I am inviting you to just consider this and avail yourself to be a part of the International New Thought Annual Congress in July. Thank you for your attention. And I want to turn this back over to our leader, Reverend Jackie.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you for sharing the information. I want to emphasize what the chair has said. I want to thank Carolyn for sharing the information. It's going to be a phenomenal event, and I just want everyone to really think about, if you register by midnight tonight, and there's a registration link on the chat icon, if you click on there, for a 25% discount. So you really want to think about that. We have our first workshop presenter. I'm excited because he works in an area that I have a personal interest in Chicago. We have started a freedom ministry that goes into the prisons. And the title of the workshop is Embracing the Outcast, My Experience with Prison Chaplaincy and Street Ministry. He describes how street and prison chaplaincy has itself become a calling and a spiritual practice, a practice in which he is not asked to fix, save, or transform anyone other than himself. The presenter is Reverend Michael Stamper. He is a teacher at Open Mind Zen in Melbourne, Florida. He has been meditating since the early 90s and practicing Zen Buddhism since 2009. He received Dharma transmission from Rashi L. Rappaport in 2020. And Mike, I hope that I pronounced that correctly. And he has a PhD in mythological studies, depth psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute in California. He was ordained as an interfaith chaplain minister in 2010 after graduating from Chaplaincy Institute in California. So he has done all of the preparation for sure. He is retired too from the banking industry and lives with his wife, Elizabeth, in Melbourne, Florida, and they have 7 children and 6 grandchildren. I am so excited for us to now listen and learn from the teachings of Michael Stamper. The presentation is about to start. We will have a chance, remember, after the presentation, after it's a video, we will have a chance to have a question and answer period with Reverend Stamper. So make sure you get your pens and paper out, so write your questions down, and we will be able to use those questions. Also, I spoke about it yesterday, and I'm going to talk about it today. INTA is the oldest umbrella organization bringing together CSL and Divine Science and UFBL and Unity, all under an umbrella so we could work together and to ensure that every member of the human family is absolutely working and knowing truth principles so that you can donate. You can seed your own garden, for as we give, we know that our own garden is flourishing. And so I invite you to donate. The how to do it is on the screen. There's a link in the chat box, I believe, or will be. You can go to newthoughtevents.org and click on the donate button. You can use PayPal, info@newthoughtalliance.org. Or of course, you can mail to INTA 5003 East Broadway Road, Mesa, Arizona. Donate to INTA. That's what we're asking for. We know that indeed, as you give and as you've been blessed, we are all stronger for it. And so I think we're ready to go. Our technical folk are saying Reverend Stamper's video is about to be shown.
Oh, my name is Mike Stamper. I'm an interfaith chaplain, and I'm going to talk to you today about street ministry and prison ministry, 2 ministries that are outreach to groups that are social outcasts. I'm going to speak from my own personal experience, including mistakes I've made along the way. I'm also going to include some of the great advice that I received from my mentors as I was learning how to be a chaplain. All of my experience has been as a volunteer chaplain, so that's the perspective I'm going to speak from. So if I'm going to talk to you from my own personal experience, it's only fair that I tell you what the scope of that experience has been. So during the last 10 years or so of my career as a banker in Washington, D.C., I volunteered one night a week at a soup kitchen called Martha's Table. My basic job was to drive a van out to 3 city parks where homeless people would congregate and serve them meals. In the van, we would have soup, sandwiches, coffee, and tea, and about a half a dozen high school students who were earning their community service credits by doing this work. We would serve food in the van and then move on to the next stop. So I want to be clear about this. This was volunteer work, but it was not chaplaincy. At the time, I had no training in chaplaincy. My main qualification for this job was that I had a valid driver's license. After I retired from banking, I decided to go to seminary. I chose Chaplaincy Institute in Berkeley, California. You may be shocked to find out that Chaplaincy Institute trains people to become chaplains. One of their requirements was for their students to engage in a practicum or an internship. Most of the students did their practicum serving at a hospice or a hospital. I decided to do mine with the street ministry, Tomanos Catholic Worker in San Francisco, in the Tenderloin of San Francisco. And specifically, Tomanos was focused on one street, Polk Street. Polk Street is a transitional neighborhood. It seemed to be perpetually a transitional neighborhood where two cultures intersect. First, there's the old Polk Street, which consists of a homeless shelter, a few adult bookstores, some dive bars, and a pretty active late night market in drugs and gay male sex. Then overlaid on that is the new Polk Street, which is hipsters, coffee shops, nightclubs, and even a few families moving in trying to get the San Francisco living experience at a discounted price. So at Tomanos, we would work with anybody, but certainly our focus was the old Polk Street. And in particular, we were focused on runaway teenage boys who were selling their bodies to pay for their heroin addictions. And in 2009, just before I graduated from Chaplaincy Institute, I began volunteering 1 day a week at a prison in Florida. I've done work at about a half a dozen different prisons in Florida, but 90% of my work has been at one, which is Lake Correctional out in Claremont. And at Lake Correctional, I've done at different times. I've taught meditation, centering prayer, yoga, led book discussions, but most centrally, I've been the Buddhist chaplain, leading a weekly Buddhist meditation service. All of the prison work that I've done has been with men. So that's the scope of the experience I've had. And with that, I'll turn to what I've learned, and I'll start with street ministry. And I'll begin with Tomanos Catholic Worker, which was and still is run by a Catholic priest named Father River Sims. And I'm starting here because my internship with him profoundly shaped my approach to chaplaincy. So on our first day together, River outlined his ministry. I walked these streets late at night into the early morning. And in the spirit of harm reduction, I have things to pass out: food, socks, condoms, clean needles. It may look like passing stuff out is what I do, but it's not. It's a way to meet these kids, to gain their trust and to become a presence in their lives. So pretty much every ministry that I've been involved with has been like this. There was a tangible purpose, an action that was performed, like feeding the hungry or teaching a meditation class. And in no way do I want to diminish the value of those services. Feeding a hungry person really is a big deal, but man does not live by bread alone. There's an opportunity here to do more, and that more is chaplaincy, which I view as a ministry of presence. So back when I was driving the food van in DC, that's not something that I understood because I wasn't yet a chaplain. I was a banking executive doing volunteer work. So my focus was on efficiency, making sure that we stayed on schedule, making sure that everybody got fed, that the area was cleaned up, and above all else, making sure the high school students were safe. So it was kind of like a business problem for me. I did have conversations with the people that we served, but those encounters were relatively superficial. They're what the philosopher Martin Buber would term an I-it encounter. Conversations that are transactional, where the other is not actually met, but rather a mental conception of the other is met. And usually that conception is objectified. There's nothing inherently wrong with I-it conversations or I-it encounters. We need to have them to get through life. But if you're looking for something deeper, you're going to be disappointed. The deeper relationship is the I-thou encounter, where two beings meet in their mutual presence and interdependence. The other is neither judged nor objectified. This is person meets person. It's the something more that opens an act of kindness, like giving food to the hungry, to become chaplaincy. And I think this is what River meant by saying that it may look like I'm just passing stuff out, but what I'm really doing is becoming a presence in their lives. So after I'd been working at Domanos for a few days, I asked River about results. I still had my business orientation and I wanted to know what success stories he could share with me. So he was visibly upset by the question. And he gave me the best piece of chaplaincy advice that I've ever been given. He said, look, if you've come down here to save somebody or change somebody, forget it. You're wasting your time, my time, and their time. These guys are going to change when they decide they want to change. All you can do is walk with them, be a presence in their lives, love them, listen to them, don't judge them. In short, simply be a friend. So River, as I understood him, was articulating his approach to chaplaincy, just being a friend that really listens, a friend that doesn't judge, a friend that's really present, a friend that's not pushing his own agenda. So this advice was a real epiphany for me for a number of reasons. First, I felt busted. I realized that I was deluded enough to think I actually was going to change somebody. But I also felt relieved because being a friend is far less daunting than becoming somebody's savior. And it also humanized the people that I was working with. These were real people, not objects for me to mold into the shape I would like them to be. I could just be with them and love them just as they were with no requirement that they fix, change, or transform themselves. So ever since, that's pretty much been my approach to chaplaincy. Be present, don't judge, really listen, love people just as they are. So I can illustrate some of this with a story. One night a week, the San Francisco Needle Exchange program would come to our neighborhood and set up shop at the end of an alley just off of Polk Street, appropriately called Hemlock Alley. And on those nights at the other end, Domanos would set up shop and we'd serve a meal to anybody that was hungry. So one night we were setting up and we'd begun serving bean soup, and I saw Ricky approaching. And Ricky was flying on speed. And he'd found a piece of plywood and he'd broken it up into splinters. And each one of those splinters was like a little dagger. And he was walking down the alley, yelling and screaming and stabbing at garbage bags and cardboard boxes with his little wooden daggers. So as people arrived for food, they were giving Ricky plenty of space. And at some point, River turned to me and said, look, he's scaring people. Why don't you see if you can move him away from here? So I struck up a conversation and walked him down the alley 20 or 30 yards, and we sat down on the curb and started to talk. This is my first real encounter with him. So the conversation I was having with him wasn't exactly an I-thou conversation, but for me, it was at least a high quality I-it conversation. As we talked, I was slowly dropping my projections and ideas about him and was starting to engage the actual human being sitting next to me. So the evenings in San Francisco can be quite cool. And I dressed in layers with multiple t-shirts and a hoodie. And I hadn't shaved for a couple of days. So I probably didn't look much different than Ricky looked. And at some point, Ricky asked me for a cigarette. And just as I was about to say to him that I don't smoke, therefore I don't have a cigarette, Around the corner walked 3 young ladies, dressed to the nines, obviously on their way out to a nightclub, and 2 of them were smoking. So I turned to Ricky and said, look, maybe one of these girls will give you a cigarette. At which point he turned to me and said, look, you ask them because to them, I'm invisible. Now, I heard this before from some of the guys that when they encounter conventional society, they feel invisible. So I jumped up, said, good evening, ladies. Could I bum a cigarette from you for my friend? Got no response, no eye contact, and certainly no cigarette. So I asked again, could I borrow a cigarette from one of you ladies for my friend here? Again, no response, no eye contact, no cigarette. It was really an amazing experience. It was as if I was a ghost or living in some sort of parallel universe. So I looked over at Ricky and our eyes met. And for one fleeting moment, I felt my whole relationship with Ricky change. He was no longer an object for me to perceive or understand. Instead, we were these 2 people in this shared experience of invisibility, of being an outcast in plain sight. And in sharing that experience, I was able to have real empathy for him. This had become an I-thou encounter. So I compare this to my experience driving the van in DC. In both cases, hungry people were being fed. But in the DC experience, I was having the I-it encounters. Whereas in San Francisco, I just had this shared experience with Ricky, which was an I-thou encounter, if only for a moment. I think it was at that point that I felt like I was really on my way to becoming a chaplain. So as I said earlier, Tomatoes had a particular focus. That focus was runaway teenage boys. So I can't tell you with any degree of certainty that my experience at Tomatoes was representative of street ministries. There's a lot of different ministries serving different people who live on the streets, and each one has his own particular focus. But I can tell you that in the world that I was in, the old Polk Street, mental health issues and substance abuse issues seemed to be the rule rather than the exception. And getting access to basic human needs like food, housing, clothing, healthcare seemed to be a universal problem. Entire ministries are built around addressing one or more of these problems. But again, that's the tangible purpose of the ministry. The chaplaincy opportunity is in the relationship that you have with the people that you're serving. So before I move on to prison ministry, let me say one final thing about street ministry. Especially street ministry in a transitional neighborhood such as the one I was in. You may think that since you're doing good, you're going to have the support of local homeowners, local businesses, the local police. And maybe some of them will be supportive, but many are not. They're going to view you as being the problem. You are an enabler. You're encouraging a bunch of bums, a bunch of outcasts to stick around in their neighborhood. And in fairness, they've got some legitimate concerns. They're tired of coming to their business in the morning and smelling the odor of urine in front of their door. They're tired of going out into the alley and finding used condoms and syringes. They're tired of petty crime like graffiti and broken windows. And they're certainly tired of the not so petty crimes. So all I can offer you on that is they are people too. Try not to judge them, but instead listen to them, understand them, and love them just as they are. And try to do what you reasonably can do to accommodate their concerns. So with that, I'm going to turn to prison chaplaincy. And the way I heard the call to prison ministry was actually quite literal and connects back to my seminary, Chaplaincy Institute. So a chaplain, especially one working in a secular environment, might encounter people of any religion or of no religion at all. So in our coursework, we would study the basics of all the world major religions, learning enough so that we at least wouldn't embarrass ourselves or put our foot in our mouths. But in addition, we were required to choose one religion and go deeper by finding a teacher and really delving into that religion. At the suggestion of one of my counselors, I chose Zen Buddhism. And at my very first visit to the Zendo, the sensei, who's the teacher, made an announcement before our meditation. He said that there were Buddhist inmates at a prison on the other side of the state that needed a volunteer to come in to sit with them. So as we sat in meditation, I just kept hearing this voice in the back of my head. Who do you think that was for? What are you waiting for? So at the end of the meditation, I talked to the sensei and said, yeah, I'd like to do it. That was 12 years ago, and I've been going to prisons ever since. So I'll just say a few words about prison overall. You're probably aware that in the US, we have a prison population of 2.25 million people. And by prison population, I'm including state and federal prisons, local jails, military prisons, detention camps. We have just over 4% of the world's population, 22% of the world's prison population. So with the exception or possible exception of North Korea and China, whose reporting is a little suspect, we are certainly the world's leaders in incarceration. You're probably also aware that our prison population is overwhelmingly male and disproportionately minorities. But a little less obvious is that new inmates coming into the system have disproportionately higher incidences of psychological problems, learning disabilities, and substance abuse issues than the general population. So let me just expand on this a little. First, with mental health. In the 1960s, we started closing down the state psychiatric hospitals, and as I understand it, for good reason. But unfortunately, nothing was put in its place. So as a result, if you have serious psychological issues in our society and you don't have the money for private care, chances are you're going to go into free fall. And the place you're going to crash land from that free fall is the mental health unit of a state prison. So in effect, state prisons have taken over where the old psychiatric hospitals left off. At the prison I visit, Lake Correctional, 2/3 of the inmates are under the care of the camp psychiatrist. So our prison system is the object of a lot of criticism, and a lot of it's pretty well deserved. But on this one, in their defense, prisons weren't set up to be the frontline providers of mental health services, but by default, that's what they've become. So the question for you as a chaplain is going to be, can you befriend and keep your heart open to those who are mentally processing reality different than you? Okay, in terms of education, one reason that people end up in prison is they don't have enough of an education to earn a living wage out in the free world. Some will get educated in prison. Hopefully that's part of a GED program. Some will get educated in other ways in prison. But some inmates have learning disabilities that make these programs difficult for them. And the kind of specialized teaching skills that they need just aren't available in prisons. So can you as a chaplain work around the literacy issues? Then on substance abuse, I've seen statistics that indicate that between 1/2 and 2/3 of the inmates coming into the system come in with the substance abuse issue. And don't think for a minute that drugs aren't available in prison. So fortunately, many prisons have 12-step programs. And for some inmates, the 12-step program is their spiritual path. But some make only token efforts to deal with their addiction, and working with them can be very frustrating. So the question will be, can you keep your heart open to the addict? Can you love him just as he is? Can you deal with him when you know that he's high? And in spite of the prevalence of mental health issues and learning disabilities and substance abuse issues, you're also going to encounter many inmates who are very intelligent, very talented, and very well educated. So you just have to approach everyone as an individual person. So my experience has been that the main difference between street ministry and prison ministry isn't the people. Indeed, many men move fluidly back and forth between prison and living on the streets. The main difference is the environment they're being met in. First, unlike the streets, prison takes care of the basic human needs: food, shelter, clothing, and healthcare. Now, the food is terrible, the clothing is a prison uniform, the shelter is a cell, and the healthcare is pretty poor, but at least the basic needs are being met. And second, unlike the streets, prison is a very controlled environment. The inmates are under tight control, and you're going to be under tight control. That control at times can be very frustrating, but it's for your own protection. And all this control means that, at least physically, prison ministry, in my opinion, is a lot less dangerous than street ministry. So let me say a few more words about the controls. So of course, it's not hard to get into a prison. It's just hard to get in with the understanding that you can go back home at night. In order to be a volunteer chaplain in Florida, you're subject to a background check, and then you have to attend a training class or a training program where you learn the rules of expected behavior. Some of those rules are going to sound very petty. Some of them are very petty. But my experience has been that the Department of Corrections is relatively unforgiving when it comes to violations of those rules. So pay attention when you get your training. I can't speak to the specific requirements of every prison or jail in the country because almost all my experience has been in Florida, and every state has its own wrinkles on the rules. However, I have been to San Quentin a few times in California and noticed that while there were some differences in the rules, the differences were in the details, not the substance. So for security reasons, prisons are phobic about contraband, especially drugs, weapons, and cell phones. So you may find that you're being patted down or searched every time you go into the prison. And since inmates display amazing ingenuity in making weapons out of relatively innocuous materials, you may find that the particular ballpoint pen you have in your pocket or the paper clip that's holding your teaching materials together is considered contraband. You may find that the corrections officer you're working with isn't very helpful, and in fact views you as a pain in the ass that they'd rather not deal with. So again, I would encourage you to be non-judgmental, listen to, understand, and love the CO who's giving you the difficulties. And be aware that inmates are going to test you. An inmate once remarked to me, there's a reason why we're called cons. So in my 12 years of experience, I have to confess that I've been played, which meaning used by an inmate. So an example would be I was once standing in the chapel, setting up an altar for a Buddhist service. And as I was lighting a candle with a lighter, a chapel orderly walked up to me, a very nice guy. He comes up and says, "Chap, I'm in trouble. I bet on the Patriots this weekend and they didn't cover the spread. And I made the bet with a guy who's very dangerous and I don't have the money to pay him. I'm afraid I'm going to be hurt. I'm afraid it may even be worse than getting hurt." Then he looked down at my lighter, this crappy little 49-cent lighter, and said, "You know, out in the yard, I could sell that lighter and it would cover half of my debt." So, geez, I had like this crisis of conscience. Am I going to let this guy get beaten up or stabbed or worse, all because I'm too chicken shit to let him have this 49-cent lighter? What kind of chaplain am I? And what kind of human am I? So I put the lighter down on the altar and walked away. So I thought about it all week, had I done the right thing or had I been played? When I came in the next week, he was waiting for me. Hey, chap, I'm in trouble again. I went double or nothing on the Patriots. And instantly I knew I'd been played like a fiddle. So we live and learn. So again, the lesson here is that the petty rules are to protect you, among other things. And it's kind of an irony here. That if you're the kind of person that has difficulty in establishing personal boundaries, you may find prison ministry to be particularly attractive because the Department of Corrections is going to establish those personal boundaries for you. It's all part of the controlled environment. All you got to do is follow the rules. So in prison, as a chaplain, you may have a program that you offer, conducting a religious service or a Bible class or a yoga or meditation class. And that program, of course, is going to have value to the inmates. But again, there's the possibility of more. And that's where the real chaplaincy begins. It's in the open I-thou encounters where one human meets another. So in my opinion, there's some qualities that a chaplain should possess to facilitate those I-thou encounters. So the first one is sincerity. Inmates, if nothing else, have sensitive BS meters. Many of them have had a lifetime of living off their own wits. They know when they're being conned because they're con artists themselves. So you don't have to be the most eloquent speaker. You don't have to pray in tongues. You don't have to perform miracles. But you do have to be sincere. And if you're not sincere, you're going to lose them. Second is integrity. When you make a promise, keep it. And there's a corollary to that. Don't make promises you know you can't keep. Third is non-judgment. If an inmate feels like he's being judged, you're going to lose him. It's as simple as that. He may not have the freedom to go home, but he does have the freedom to not attend your program. And there's a corollary to this. Don't ask an inmate why he's in prison. It's none of your business. Now, at some point in the relationship, that inmate may choose to confide in you or confess to you. That's a whole different story. That's an opportunity to have the I-thou conversation, but you don't initiate that on your own. Fourth is keeping confidentiality. If you're a chaplain in prison for any period of time, or for any length of time, you're going to hear a lot of stuff about a lot of people. If you can't keep it confidential, inmates are not going to confide in you. And in prison, a failure to maintain confidentiality can have serious consequences. A slip of the tongue really can put a life in jeopardy. And fifth, as always is the case in chaplaincy, listening skills are paramount. So if you haven't taken a course in listening, it might be worth your while to do so. So just some simple techniques to keep in mind. Like lean into the conversation like you want to hear every single word. Make eye contact. And by all means, don't be looking around the room at other conversations. Make some indication that you're listening, like nod your head or say, uh-huh, or whatever. Mirror back to the inmate what you've heard him say. So the inmate says, geez, chap, I had it really tough when I was growing up. My father used to beat me with a coal shovel. To which I would say, geez, I hear you saying you had a really tough childhood. Your father beat you up with a coal shovel. By mirroring back what the inmate said, it creates an environment where he's more comfortable divulging more, showing more of himself in the meeting. You actually have, I think, a couple of opportunities to do this. You can do it during the conversation, or often your conversations are going to end with a prayer. And in the prayer is a great opportunity to reiterate what you heard the inmate saying. When there's a pause in the conversation, that silence, that pregnant pause, don't feel obligated to fill it. Let the tension work the inmate and allow him to fill it. That'll encourage him to say more. And the sixth thing is empathy and compassion. Allow yourself to feel the pain that the other is feeling. You don't have to take it home with you, but in this moment, feel it. And if you can do all these things and do them well, it's going to add up to presence. A felt sense by the inmate that you were really there, that you were 100% of yourself was really there, and that you really listen to him, and you really care about him, and you really accept him just as he is. So let me come back to the subject of non-judgment, because this is such a huge issue in prison ministry, excuse me, for both the inmate and the chaplain. So some of the men in prison have done some pretty god-awful things. And it's important that there be consequences for those actions. And in some cases, a lifetime of incarceration may be necessary to protect society. But does the crime define the person? Is a person who robs a bank, therefore, a bank robber, as if that defines who they are? Are we not asked to hate the sin, but love the sinner? So if you find yourself judging inmates who have committed certain crimes, that could be a signal to you that you have some unhealed issue of your own. And I don't want to over-psychologize this, but I do believe there's a correlation between our own inner psychological landscape and our outer social landscape, that the parts of our own personality that we've disowned are reflected in people in society that we've disowned, and vice versa. So when I encounter an inmate whose crime triggers me, I need to look at myself. The emotions that are arising within me have less to do with the inmate than they do with my own unhealed past trauma. So let me make this more concrete. When I was a child, I was sexually abused by a man in our neighborhood. Of course, I told no one at all about it. I thought I had done something wrong. I tried to pretend like it had never happened, and just bury it in my unconscious. But like a zombie in some sort of B-grade horror film, these events would come back to haunt me. It took years of psychotherapy to deal with it. And when I started prison ministry, I can remember thinking to myself, I think I'm pretty much prepared to deal with anything in prison except a child molester. I'm not sure I'm ready to deal with that yet. And of course, one of the first inmates to open up to me was indeed a man convicted of molesting a child. So maybe this was a coincidence, maybe not. He approached me in a pretty oblique fashion. After a Buddhist meditation class, he came up to me and began talking about himself. He said he designed missiles in the space program at Cape Canaveral, and that he'd worked with military contractors to develop guided missiles. Look me up on the internet, he kept saying. Look me up on the internet and you'll see that I'm a rocket scientist. So my first instinct was I didn't want to look him up. I thought it was a bunch of BS to start off with. But also I just felt like a voyeur looking people up on the internet. And I pretty much made a conscious decision to not know about the crime that an inmate had committed, so that I would be sure that I would be open to him. But since this guy was so persistent, I went ahead and did the internet search as he had requested. And the search, of course, revealed nothing about the space program or rockets, but did in fact reveal that this gentleman was a sex offender and indeed had been convicted of abusing a child, which of course is exactly what he knew I was going to find. So it pushed all my buttons. I wasn't sure what to do next or how to talk to him. So I waited a couple of weeks while I formulated a plan. But by waiting to talk to him, I left him hanging for a couple of weeks. And I think in that period where he was left hanging, he felt like he'd been judged. So when we finally spoke, it was too late. I never was able to fully repair that relationship, and I do believe if I'd responded sooner or simply told him that I didn't want to do an internet search on him, the problem would have been avoided. But the whole episode taught me something else, which is I hadn't completely healed my own trauma. And in opening my heart to this particular inmate, albeit belatedly, I was now able to accept and love that wounded part of me. Okay, in your conversations with inmates, you're going to find that they, like everybody else, have emotional issues that they're dealing with. Each inmate's going to have his own individual issues, his own unique set of problems. But there are some issues, some emotions that seem to come up repeatedly. Grief, anger, guilt, and shame. So grief arises in us when we lose something or someone. And for many inmates, there's considerable grief in the loss of their freedom that comes with the prison sentence. So you're probably all familiar with the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and the stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Some guys will go through these stages within the first few weeks of prison and get to acceptance early. Others may take their entire sentence to do it. Some get stuck in one stage and seem to stay there. So my approach to working with grief is to just try and be a friend, to just listen, allow the inmate to feel his loss, move through the stages of grief and find a new meaning in their life. Sometimes they simply need a place where they can cry. Sometimes they need a place where they can scream. And the grief isn't always about the loss of freedom. Some inmates are going to lose a family member during their time of incarceration. And as a volunteer chaplain, you may find yourself being asked to inform an inmate of that loss. Now, in the movies, inmates are given furloughs from prison to attend funerals. In real life, it's kind of a pipe dream. In 12 years, I've never seen it happen. So what I usually do is perform some sort of private memorial service for the inmate. It's like his way of being able to attend the funeral. This doesn't have to be complicated. It can be as simple as lighting a candle, saying a prayer, reading a bit of scripture that's meaningful to the inmate. I always ask the inmate if he can say a few words about the deceased, maybe remembering the good times. And that usually occurs with some release of emotion. So again, this is one of those things that doesn't have to be polished or grandiose, but it does have to be sincere and real. So I'm going to discuss guilt and shame together, although clearly there's a difference between the two. Usually guilt is related to a particular action, like I did something I believe is unethical and I feel guilty about it. So as long as I'm not holding myself to an unrealistic standard, guilt is actually functional and healthy. The discomfort of feeling guilt causes me to modify my behavior so that I actually do live up to my standards. You might think of guilt as being internalized accountability. Shame, on the other hand, is a different beast. When I experience shame, the problem isn't that I merely acted in an unethical way. The problem is that I feel fundamentally unethical. There's something wrong with me. I feel so fundamentally flawed that I'm unworthy of being loved. So unlike guilt, feeling shame is dysfunctional and unhealthy. I've heard Brene Brown say that shame thrives on three things: secrecy, silence, and judgment. And unfortunately, prisons deliver on all three counts. Shame and shaming others is just endemic to prison culture. And the antidote to shame is empathy and compassion. which is right in the wheelhouse of chaplaincy. Again, the key is to love and listen without judgment, to feel what the inmate is feeling. In short, to just be a good friend. And in this context, I think it may be worthwhile just underscoring the value of being a friend. Because in addition to all the things that we've already discussed, consider the value that your friendship has to a man who sees himself as an outcast, who's caught in a downward spiral of shame and self-worthlessness, who feels not only unloved, but unlovable. Friendship can really be important to that guy. So I'll bring this to a close by circling back to the advice I was given in the street ministry. Look, if you've come down here to save somebody or change somebody, forget it. You're wasting my time, your time, their time. These guys are going to change when they are ready to change. All you can do is walk with them, be a presence in their life. Don't judge them, listen to them, and love them. Just be a friend. Street ministry and prison ministry aren't about changing people or saving lives. It's about loving people and being a good friend. It's about learning to love flawed people. And in doing so, thus learning to accept and love the flaws within ourselves. Which is to say, there is one person that's going to be changed by prison ministry. It's yourself, the chaplain.
Wow, wow. I am so moved by Reverend Stamper and his very intense and detailed presentation. He will be joining us live shortly. And I invite each of you to, if you have questions, to please use the question and answer icon to put in a question, because he indeed, Reverend Stamper, has evidence that there's a depth of his knowledge in these areas. We are talking about making a difference today. We are looking at using our knowingness of God, our truth, to go into the world to make a difference. And as Reverend Stamper has shown us, and through his presentation, it's truly what you do. It's what you are called to do, but so often we don't know how to do it. And there are so many caveats. I think Reverend Stamper is with us now.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. Your presentation, your workshop was totally for someone who is moving into this area over the last 3 years. I'm going to pull you all the way into Chicago and have you sit in the midst of us to help us understand. So I want to thank you for a profound presentation, as covering so many topics, yet in a way that was depth. Let me ask, I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask you. And one is really looking from the end. I have one that tied to the very beginning of your presentation, but you mention this word often, and it's friendship. And one of the things, as we've gone into the prison and the new prison ministry that we've started at Christ Universal Temple in Chicago, we have been taught or counseled, be careful about friendship. We have empathy and compassion, but you use the word friendship, and I want you to talk about that a little bit, if you will.
Yeah, the Department of Corrections is going to encourage you to not establish deep friendships. And again, the rules are going to vary from prison to prison, state to state. But in Florida, the idea is that when an inmate leaves prison, the chaplain can no longer have contact with them, which is, I suppose, a protection to the chaplain, but it's kind of problematic because the most difficult time for an inmate is that first couple of weeks when they've been released, and it certainly would be helpful if a chaplain could kind of usher them through that transition.
We are, and the various people online, think about your particular ministry. At our church, we're working to establish a ministry for inmates, we call them residents, when they leave prison, to be able to, for what you just lifted up, the most difficult time is they're leaving and moving into a new world because it's no longer prison. But
Let me say that I believe is the number one most important issue that can be addressed right now, is helping inmates in transition.
okay. I want to ask you another question, and you explained it, but I put a really big question mark initially before you went into some explanation. So I'd like for you to talk about it a little bit. And that is the term ministry of presence. You said chaplaincy has to be ministry of presence. And it's almost not just chaplaincy, the street ministry, as well as in chaplaincy in general. You want to talk about that again? You touched on it, you pulled out some, I think, qualities, but I just need to hear you talk about ministry of presence, that term.
I think it's showing up and being here in this moment with the other person. It's going for that I-thou relationship where the separation just seems to melt away, and it's almost as if you're one with the other person. And I don't know how else to describe it. It's like time stands still. The atmosphere around you feels thick.
Yeah. I thought the thought came to me of what we are work with in a New Thought teaching, and that is, and Reverend Stanford, I don't know if you can turn up your volume a little bit, or maybe, I don't know if Reverend Dale can. Someone said they're having a little difficulty hearing you. It's the concept that we are one, that we are one. We are the illusion of being separate, but we are one. And so in the ministry of presence, you really are working on and working off that principle that you're one with that other person you are interacting with. So
right. Certainly, as a Buddhist chaplain, there's a sense in Buddhism that everything is one as well. So that's sort of common ground that we share.
yes. We have a question from Dr. B. When inmates reject 12-step solutions of admission, inventory, and service, does this create barriers to your work?
My attitude has been, I try to work with anyone, even guys that show up and they're high when they show up. The one requirement I have is that they not be disruptive. So we can have a meditation, can be in a room with 15 or 20 guys. Maybe 15 of them are meditating and 5 of them are nodding out. And I'm happy to have the guys there that are nodding out, provided they don't disrupt the service. Now, if they get disruptive, that's a separate story. Then I'll just escort them out.
There is another question from Paula, and she writes, this is fairly long, so you'll have to listen, Reverend Stafford. She writes, at a church I spoke often at in Florida, there were often homeless people who would wander in during and after service and during fellowship. What's the most compassionate thing we can do to be present to them when parishioners may be feeling uncomfortable?
sitting with them, talking to them, and hearing their story. I think people just have a real need to tell their story.
I would.
Inmates in particular have that need.
Mhm.
Because we're in an environment where everybody's giving them direction, telling them what they should be doing to straighten themselves up, but nobody wants to listen to what their problems are.
Okay. And that comes back to ministry of presence to me. That comes back to being there and being compassionate and empathetic. And yeah, we have another question. Reverend Stamper, please share your email and website information. I think maybe Reverend Dale is going to have that, I don't know, on the
I have an email address, which I'm happy to share.
please.
It's Stamper, STAMPER, MK, these are my initials, at AOL.com. I
Okay.
have no website.
Okay, stampermk@aol.com, and Reverend Dale has just put it on the chat. And also the person said, this is Reverend Shoes. Thank you for your insightful personal experiences. It has been a true blessing, kind sir. There's another question from Reverend Jeff. Reverend Mike, do you have contacts with ministers outside of the prison system that you can refer released inmates?
I have contact with some Buddhist centers around Florida that I can refer inmates to. I don't have really contacts with any other religious group, outside of the prison. I may certainly have contacts inside of the prison with other chaplains who are coming in, representing other religions.
Thank you for that. So the notion too, I want to come back to your message was really great. You asked, can you keep your heart open when you're working with the mentally ill, when you're working with those who perhaps have literacy issues, when you're working with those who are subject or who are drug addicted. And I guess I just want to suggest, when I was first being ordained, there was a minister who said, everyone should not go to visit the ill in the hospital. and because you go in there and you, as the supposed minister, perhaps makes it worse because you can't see God. You see all the wires and you see all of the illness. And I guess for someone who's been going into the prisons for about 3 years, I feel that way. I guess if there are those, everybody can't be a chaplain in a ministry, in a prison. Everybody can't be a chaplain in on the street. It's a calling, and to be identified as a minister or a reverend or practitioner, that's great. But can you just speak to this, the calling of doing this work?
Yeah, to me, the biggest mistake most chaplains make going into prisons is they go in with an agenda. They go in with the answer and they haven't even heard what the problem is. And I think that you've got the cart in front of the horse when you do that. You have to go in and be open to the inmate and accept the inmate and love the inmate just as they are, without any requirement that they change or transform or become the person you would like them to be. Now, at some point, they may want to change, and when they do, you can be of assistance. But if you're going in with an agenda that you're trying to push, basically you just push people away.
And that's back to I love you said you wanted to teach us how to do this, but we are not going to be fixing, saving, or transforming anyone. other than ourselves as we move into this work, if we so choose to do it. I really want to thank you because indeed your work is making a difference. And the real challenge for those of us who want to be able to count what we've done, you don't know necessarily, but we do know that as you're doing what you're doing, taking your truths, taking you into the scenario that you described, you're making a difference. And that's what we want all the people who are at this conference and all the people who are wanting to do good, think about it and then look at seeing how you can make a difference. Thank you, Reverend Mike. We appreciate you being with us and sharing so much wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you. It was an honor to speak to you all.
And so we will have a break and we will have an opportunity after the break to come back and hear a phenomenal speaker. If you have an opportunity for the next few minutes during the break, you might want to register for the Congress in July 20th to the 23rd, 2021. Register today so that you can receive the 25% discount. And also, you might want to think about donating. No, not think about it. You might want to take the action of donating to INTA. It's on the screen, the ways you can do it. I can speak them again. It's go and tap on the donate button on newthoughtevents.org. Use your PayPal account or the mail, US mail. But you do want to seed your garden by giving to INTA. And as we are closing this particular session and going for a break, I just want to shout out, we have people from Charlottesville, Virginia, and from Tennessee, and from Arizona, and from Florida. Just thank you for letting me know. And anybody I haven't called out, just write in where you're from, and I'd love to call it out. But yes, you can register. The link is on the chat, as well as the button for you to donate is in the chat. We will see you in, I think, about 15 minutes.